and then UC with the HESTI will be the third one. In question and answer portion, I'm going to be passing the baton to Miss Diana Labra. Then later on, the closing remarks going to be you, Daniel. And then I'm going to be sharing some quick quote, and then I'm going to thank everyone for participating.
Perfect.
So that's just about it.
Perfect. Hai Maho, konnichiwa. Selamat siang.
Mao-san, Nakayama-san, good afternoon.
Unmute first. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yay.
Hello, selamat siang.
Selamat siang, Maho. So happy to see you here.
Yes, thank you for inviting us.
Sure. Always. Thank you for supporting us also. All right.
More
Yes,
power.
Gambate
kudasai. We have, I guess that Diana is here. I'm not sure if we have to rename, maybe because it's named Alisa, right?
Alisa, yeah. Please rename yourself.
I can.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we're about to begin, kindly turn on your cameras and switch your microphones to silent mode to avoid any interruption while the program is ongoing. Thank you.
All right, we can start, Dan.
Magandang hapon, salamat siang. Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to be your host for today's seminar forum on the global pandemic crisis and its impact to migrant workers in Asia, OFWs, their families, and children left behind. I am Don Oliver Riviera from the Mindanao State University General Santos City Office of International Affairs, and on behalf of the working committees of this endeavor, the Ateneo Migration Center of Ateneo de Davao University, led by Ms. Diana Carmela Labra, Mindanao State University General Santos City, headed by our Chancellor, Dr. Anshari P. Ali, and Office of International Affairs by Dr. Anderson Villa, together with the Human Rights Working Group Indonesia, represented by Daniel Awigra, and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation with Ms. Maho Nakayamo, which I'm going to be introducing later on. I would like to welcome you to this event. We are glad that you are here in this event to give an avenue to talk about one of the most pressing issues in the pandemic or today, migration. We hope that you will learn a lot as we have lined up talks for fruitful engagement with you. Today's agenda is the following. We will start with an opening remarks with the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, to be followed by the speakers for the seminar forum on the grassroots perspective, research component, and the validation of the research to tie up both speakers. There will be discussions to expound on this conversation about migration, which will be the second part of the program. Thereafter, we'll open the table in the discussion and we will answer any questions that you have or that you may have for the speakers, to be moderated by our colleague in Ateneo de Davao University. Before we can start, there are some reminders for house rules we need to follow. First, please make sure that you're using your name in Zoom so that we can easily identify you in this session. Earlier, we have encountered the problem that all of us has the name Alisa, so please make sure you're using your name. There's a 3 dots when you click your name. Then when you click that, you can see the rename, and please put your full name with it. Second is that this is a plenary session. Only the speakers are allowed to speak. During the question and answer portion, you may switch on your camera and microphone once you are recognized. But please stay muted if you are not. Third, if you want to raise a technical concern or if you have questions, please feel free to use the chat room where there is a Q&A out there. There's an icon, and please address to the speaker or indicate the speaker to whom you address your question or questions to. During the question and answer, also please use the raise hand function across your name if you wish to raise a question live, and please wait to be acknowledged for you to be unmuted. Please identify yourself before speaking and keep your question or comment in a 1-minute window. We are currently on a live stream on YouTube. It's on the chat box and some pages in Facebook. And you're all encouraged to share this live with your friends and colleagues. We will begin the program with an opening prayer and the singing of the Philippine national anthem.
وقال ربكم ادعوني استجب لكم آمين يا الله يا رب العالمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Amin.
Keimanan sikuna idayanku untuk mapiasa ini nangno langit tau tanah aurang tau legini nang tertulus ni kau sikunati madang hidayanku mepiaka sikunati madang hidayanku mepiaka
Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is thy kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Okay, thank you. Now that we want to move forward with our program, we wanted to please or to formally welcome us to the program. We are inviting Miss Maho Nakayama to please turn on her camera and audio. And to formally begin the program, we ask her to deliver her welcome remarks.
Thank you very much for kind introduction. I'm sorry, can you hear me? Thank you so much for your...
Yes, go ahead.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Maho Nakayama, Director of the Asia Peace Initiative Department of Sasaka Peace Foundation. Thank you for joining us today at this seminar entitled Global Pandemic Crisis and its Impact to Migrant Workers in Asia. We would like to express our sincere gratitude to Mindanao State University, General Santos City, and Ateneo Migration Center of Ateneo de Davao University for hosting today's event. We would also like to warmly welcome all the participants and resource persons, including children of OFWs, Overseas Filipino Workers, Dr. Anderson Villa, Ms. Inorisa S. Erento, and the discussants. Sasaka Peace Foundation is a private foundation established in 1986 to promote international understanding and cooperation. Our group, Asia Peace Initiative Department, which I lead, has been conducting our programs under 3 pillars. The first one is consolidating platform for peace building, disengagement from violence, and reconciliation. The second one is building inclusive society and empowering minorities and vulnerable populations. And the third one is rebuilding partnership between Japan and Asia. Under the second pillar, we have focused on the issues of migration from Southeast Asia to East Asia and the emergence of problems such as human rights violation and exploitation. We have the privilege of working with a human rights working group in Indonesia in the past 3 years, and we have conducted studies on the themes of baseline studies on migration in ASEAN. And basically, we have done the 4 studies on 4 themes. The first one is the baseline studies on migration in ASEAN. The second one is a stay behind children in Myanmar, Indonesia, and the Philippines. And the third one is a pre-departure processes of Indonesian migrant workers to Japan. And the last one is impact of COVID-19 on migrant workers in 7 regions and countries in East and Southeast Asia. We are very pleased to see that in today's event, the foremost experts in civil society organization in the Philippines get together here to discuss the children left behind and the impact of coronavirus pandemic. In Japan, migrant workers, including technical intern trainees and international students, have been restricted from entering and leaving the country since last spring due to the pandemic. Those migrants have stranded in both the Japanese and sending countryside, and migrant workers, many of whom are non-regular workers, faced a difficult situation in their lives due to drastic salary cuts and layoffs. The number of Filipinos living in Japan is about 280,000 people, accounting for about 10% of total migrants here. Since April 2020, we have asked Professor Wako Asato of Kyoto University to conduct survey about the impact of pandemic toward migrant workers in Western Japan. And more than half of interviewees were from the Philippines. It turned out that those who worked for the restaurants and hotels experienced 70% of salary cut. And their biggest concern was not only about their own living conditions, but maybe naturally to Filipino, or also about their families in home country. This pandemic clearly showed to us how vulnerable the positions of migrant workers have been, but at the same time, how our lives in Japan have been dependent on the migrant workers' very dedicated work. However, although the problems surrounding the migrant workers have been very difficult, through our studies and the series of discussion, we have found that despite all these difficulties with regards to the vulnerability of migrant workers, we have met not a few very encouraging initiatives of individuals and organizations or migrant communities themselves, extending their support and empowering migrant workers themselves, which constitute the foundation of our hope to envision the post-pandemic society in Asia. Here, if I may, I want to introduce one such small initiative recently we supported. About a week ago, I participated a book launch event of a group called Kakehashi, a group of Filipino and Japanese professionals who published a handbook for Japanese Filipino youth and children who first come to Japan to live with their parents. Because of the amendment of citizenship law, we are now welcoming many more children and youth from the Philippines coming to Japan, but they met many difficulties, mainly due to the cultural differences or loss of sense of belongings. This handbook is meant for them and is full of very detailed introduction to Japanese culture and history, educational system, or very practical knowledge like how to buy mobile phones, but at the same time introduce actual stories and voices of Japanese Filipino children who went through a very difficult journey, but finally gained confidence and became able to celebrate their cultural roots and identity. I think that difficulties met by stay-behind children, or even if they fly along with their parents too, expose clearly the short-sighted project of the problem of short-sighted project of migration driven only by economic merit. However, I understand that it has been the vision of this whole project that if the stakeholder across the region bring wisdom and experiences together, we can bring about transformation even little by little. Lastly, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to Mr. Daniel Avigra and the team at Human Rights Working Group for their professional and dedicated works. I would also like to appreciate Dr. Anderson Villa too for his hard and professional work to conduct the study of left behind children and also to prepare this event under this pandemic situation. We, the Sasagatis Foundation, would like to continue our efforts to contribute to the improvement of migration problems in Asian countries, and at the same time consider the responsibility of Japan as a destination country. I hope today's discussion will be a major step forward to stimulate discussion in the Philippines and strengthen the platform for dialogue between key stakeholders in Southeast Asia and East Asia toward better solutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Nakayama, for that wonderful, warm welcome to our distinguished speakers and guests. Now we will begin on the first part of our program, where we invited speakers from the Grassroots experience, an expert on migration to talk about our topics research and its components, and a validation to patch up the experience and the findings. They will be given 15 minutes each to present. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to send them over the Q&A box out there in the chat box, and please indicate to which speaker or speakers you're addressing to. So now for the first part, to give us some idea of the grassroots experience of the impact of the pandemic for the children left behind, we have speakers from Anak OFW and Japan Filipino children. For those non-native speaker of Filipino, Bisaya, or other vernacular that will be given by our speaker, I will be translating them and synthesizing them over after they talk. So please kindly share your own. May I ask the Anak OFW representative to please turn on your audio to start talking about your experience, your grassroots experience? Again, here's RJ Dakup to talk about his experience. Go on, Langga.
Ginastap ko nila.
Hello. Mayong hapon sa inyo mga ma'am, sir. Ayos lang tanin niyo. Ako dahil si RJ Dakop, 16 years old, nag-eskwela sa Erico Nograles. Padayon ka pong mag-eskwela aron makabangon niyo. Ako ditong naga-attend sa activities sa Mindanao Migrants. Kung mama di pangalan kay si Ricklin Dakop. Kung nag-abroad sa Kuwait, upat may mag-igsoon. So, magsugod ta sa pandemic atong dito may nagkalisod. Kung pandemic, kung naabot ang pandemic, grabe lisod di kayo na time. Naglisod pa mi ato, abot ang pandemic na naglisod pa mi maayo. Pero at least na nagatabang-tabang sa mga hilingan, care sa mga, nagpasalamat kung ganit ni kapil na kay aron kay unal. Pero dili ko kayo ng kuan. Kung pandemic kay sa una kay wala pandemic, kwarta pa mi ato, makatrabaho, ka-sideline. Karon kay pandemic naman, tanong sugod kay wala na. Tambay ramig balay ato. Nya, ito, tinabangay ra pini sa akong mga igsoon, aron makalihok. Akong igsoon kay tiglaba, akong duha ka babae, duwa man pud may kalalaki, kay akong kuya kay tabang man pud trabaho, karinderya lang. Akong mama nagkapadala gyapon, naman to yung akong mama na driver sa Dugbago, butan sad kuan to niya to kang butanan sad niya to niya kay nagatabang-tabang man pud siya sa mua. Wala ang pud siya na inlad sa mama kay gwapa, tabang naluoy to siya sa amua kay mga bata. Naglisod lagi daw kay dili kay maka kuan tarong, eskwela. Na dito kay los niya tong nagkaila sila ni Uncle John kay tabangan niya minalang pod nagkuyab to sila kay abdi makuanan. Akong mama kay abroad na nagsugod ng pandemic na kulbaan ko ato kay basig maunsa siya dito sa gawas kay dito biya sa laing bansa biya ang pinakadaghan og COVID daw. Nga to kay kuan masig sumba ko ba kuanan siya sa COVID. Wala na mo kuan sa mo timan niya kay among lula og lulo kay wala naman sa mua mura ra man mi gisalikpay para mi bugaboy kay nag-away man na si mama og lulo nako. So wala namin sila nagkuan, wala namin nagatabang sila, nagapangay kuan sila tabang. Nilayo to sila sa mua. Nya dito kay abroad si mama ato na time kay aron makakaon gud may tarong. Nami sa balay atong pandemic kay ako tiglaba, tabang namin sa akong mga igsoon, ang kuya kay trabaho. Ito.
I think they're having a technical difficulty, but so far what we have got from RJ is that he's one of the four siblings. And when the pandemic happened, there were hardships. Their neighbors helped them to survive their needs and to assist them for their needs since his mother is abroad or working abroad. Then before pandemic, they can still work, they can go out. But right now they're faced with this a lot of paperwork before they can go out, medical certificates and such because they're minors. And in Davao, his older sibling is working, and also sometimes he gives money to them. But the main provider for his family is his mother, which is abroad, who still sends money, but still there is that certain animosity, there is certain doubt, and also that doubt of security, that she might get laid out from her job, and there's a COVID infection, that will be she will be infected with the COVID-19. So that's so far what we got from RJ, and hopefully when he gets back and sorted out the technical difficulty, I think we could get something from him rather. RJ, would you like to continue? Langga, nakamute ka, Langga. Sige, storya Langga.
Sa katong mangiyo na ta mangi.
Punta isip anak bubulyo,
Bicol na ka?
punta isip anak OFW punta nanta may paabot sa gobyerno na kani mga magkalisod ni na anak OFW unta namoy mga kuan sa gobyerno kanang hinabang ginagmay unta maapil unta mi mga anak OFW na magkalisod dili ra pud kami kana kung uban diya nagkalisod unta matabangan ta mi mo luwas-luwas ni ginagmay di na kayo magkalisod. Unta matabangan mi sa mga gobyerno.
Go on. Sige ga, storya lang.
Programa sa Libya. Okay na to.
Okay na to, sir.
Okay, so the last part, thank you RJ for sharing that experience. I know it's really hard for you to share those, especially that it's a very sensitive topic to start off, which is your personal life. But what we got from the last part is from RJ is that there's government aid for them, but still it's not enough to sustain them for their needs and for their daily living. So just so you know, this is a disclaimer that there was a consent signed from the parents of the representatives, or the representative that children left behind to make an appearance for our event today, just so you know. And moving on to the next talk, where he will give the meat of the experiences of the migrant workers and their families. The next speaker is a professor of political science department and the director of the Office of International Affairs in Mindanao State University, General Santos City, Dr. Anderson Villa. Sir Andy?
Thank you, Don. Yes, thank you.
Go on, Sir Andy.
Can you, yeah, got it. Again, salamat siyang, konnichiwa, mayong hapon sa tanan. On behalf of the Office of the Chancellor and the Office of the International Affairs, we appreciate your joining us today. And of course, I admire the openness of our student, our young anak OFW, sharing his experience and how this in fact actually affected their lives during the pandemic. And briefly, I'm just gonna share a bit about this paper or this presentation on the impact of COVID-19 and the prospects for OFWs and their children left behind. And initially, we wanted to also, just a brief background, we wanted to bring the voices of the children themselves, as agreed with our partner from the HRWG Indonesia and Sasakawa Peace Foundation, that we should also involve the children themselves in this discussion, no? That their voices be heard as well, especially that we are discussing about the impact of migration and the children of migrants workers or migrant workers who they left behind back home. And this is I guess a an emerging concern not only here in the Philippines, and this is also an ongoing concern in Indonesia, no, as an emerging sending country. And just a quick note, no, so this is a part of this presentation covers the research I've done with the Human Rights Working Group in Indonesia. So if you can see on the next slide, this is the title of our research. And in fact, we already had a book launch of this research material, which we finished during the pandemic in last year. And the title is Stay Behind Children in Myanmar, the Philippines, and Indonesia. I partly covered the Philippine context, and I would like to also hear, some more inputs from our experts, especially we have here Dr. Marla Assis, who is more expert, is more knowledgeable on this on this concern about migration in the context of the Philippines. And partly during the pandemic, the lockdown that we had last year, I presented a bit about this with the Philippine Political Science Association on the impact of COVID-19 to global migration prospects for Filipino migrants and their children left behind. We have students coming here also. We have a subject actually, in the social sciences, College of Social Sciences, the contemporary world, and one aspect there is global migration. And some of my students also from the political science are attending right now here, joining us via Zoom. So in the first slide I showed you a while ago, we are actually celebrating, no? And it's an annual celebration. We have this Migrant Workers Day every June 7th of the year, to commemorate the signing into law of Republic Act 8042, or the Migrant Workers Act of 1995. It is celebrated in recognition of the valuable contribution of our modern day heroes, the overseas Filipino workers. Up till the present, many Filipinos are still longing to leave their homes, however, and families, to seek employment abroad, and that OFWs remain as strong pillars of the Philippine economy. However, the rest of the non-migrant Filipino population is not perhaps fully aware of the sacrifices migrants have to make or have had to make. Undeniably, beyond such a rhetoric and patriotic label as new heroes of today, one of the most neglected concerns of the OFWs is the impact of migration on their families. It goes unnoticed that this has a huge long-term effect, especially on their left-behind children in terms of health, proper parental guidance, and psychosocial well-being. Their plight and their life struggles are once again placed on the line as the world is facing the coronavirus pandemic crisis. So this presentation seeks to explore how migrants and their families, especially left behind children, cope during the COVID-19 crisis. But I'm not saying that their coping mechanism is a newly emerging concern, but this has been there, no? Especially that we have this is only worsened by the COVID-19 crisis. As you know, before the outbreak, migration scholars have already expressed their predicament over the government's seeming lack of coherent mechanisms to implement existing policies that directly address the concerns of migrants' children. As the world is grappling with how to survive the current global pandemic crisis, this is, I guess, another bigger challenge, no, is being faced by migrant workers when they go back home, they come back home on how to sustain parenting, either remotely or as a returnee or as a repatriates. Not to mention the fact that repatriation is now becoming a common issue, as returning migrant parents have to abruptly adapt to the new normal arrangement, where children have to stay at home for distance and flexible learning modalities. So in the next slide, um, I'm just showing you here the occupational uh, categories, no? So this is the occupation of OFWs and their skills actually vary, no? As shown in this slide, across the globe. They can be domestic workers, drivers, construction workers, chefs, managers, doctors, nurses, engineers, among others. So based on a survey by SWS, 1 out of 6 or 7 families in the Philippines is an OFW family or has a member of family working abroad. So looking at this, can you move to the next slide? Just click next, that one. And then, yeah, you can see here 59 or about 60% are engaged in elementary occupations. So elementary occupations actually consist of simple and routine tasks, which mainly require the use of handheld tools and often some physical effort. So this is according to the ILO. This may refer to, or the International Labor Organization. Such occupation refers to what migration scholars call as dirty, difficult, dangerous work, otherwise known as 3D jobs, including uh, the work, those who are working in the household, like domestic workers, cleaners, and launderers. Okay. So in the next slide, you can see the 5 countries that benefit the most remittances. So you can see this domestic workers and migrant workers abroad really benefit, no? Especially their families benefit from the remittances that they send back home. And this is not to say that this is only a concern with the Philippines, but you can see the big chunk, you know, in the case of the Philippines. For instance, this is another figure showing you the 5 countries that benefit the most from remittances, and you have the Philippines there as the one of the top universities with 34 billion dollars spent, no? I mean, in terms of remittances, covering the concern of the families. Okay, next slide. Now, in terms of destination of land-based overseas Filipino workers, this is in 2015. This data may not be that old, but I guess other scholars could cite that this is still an emerging concern. Like, you have most of the workers are actually based in Saudi Arabia and UAE, and followed by you can see, for instance, Singapore. But the rest, in the top 5, you have Qatar and Kuwait. In Kuwait, it's actually in the Middle East, and the others are located or that involve regions or countries in Southeast Asia. Okay. In the next slide, so I'm showing you here again the distribution of OFWs by place of work. This is by the Philippine Statistics Authority. You can see Saudi Arabia emerging as top most uh, in Asia, no, where most migrants would leave to work, about 90%, about 86%. Now, in the next yeah, I'm showing you this part that at the same time, for instance, last year during the outbreak, no, of the pandemic crisis, so we have, in terms of confirmed cases, so this is still an ongoing concern. No? Even in Saudi Arabia, they have the highest case, one of the highest cases as well. So along with this, number of workers converging in Saudi is also the riskier part, no, for our migrant workers would, staying in countries like Saudi Arabia with increasing number of COVID cases. Okay. In the next slide, please. So in our research with the HRWG, there are in the case of the Philippines, and I guess this has been partly mentioned by our key informant today, that there is this obvious impact that we can see on the parental migration, no, of the parental migration on left behind children. And up till the until the present, the World Bank concludes that the migration of workers is largely motivated by the search for economic opportunities, as I mentioned a while ago. However, there are approximately 9 million Filipino children under the age of 18 who are left behind by one or both parents to work or live temporarily or permanently outside the Philippines. Prior to the lockdown and community quarantine measures, as data sources are lacking on the comprehensive data profiling of children left behind by their working parents abroad. This research that we conducted, particularly in the context of the southern Mindanao region here in Davao and Jensan, given the limited mobility, most of the migrants, obviously, since most of the migrants who leave to work abroad are mothers, so this is where the context of, since we are commemorating the Women's Month, no, and obviously we cannot deny the fact that there is what we call feminization of migration. So most of those who leave to work abroad are mothers. The data from the interview suggests that the stay behind children are taken care of by their immediate family relatives, either by the father, grandmothers, or both parents, or both grandparents, or their uncles or aunts as guardians when the mother is working abroad. So most of the child respondents open up their pent-up emotions about their personal longing on missing their mothers while growing up, since most of their mothers left them at a young age. So this is, I'm showing you here some of the narratives from the responses. These are just some of the terms that we can perhaps call out from the sharing, no, the skipping of classes, demotivation at school, emotional problems, and yeah, this is what I mentioned about being left to grandparents at a young age. And follow-up short virtual interviews were conducted to a few of these OFW children, and a few others shared about the difficulties of their migrant parents working abroad amidst the pandemic crisis. And it's been mentioned by our key informant a few minutes ago that there is a need to also somehow highlight this growing crisis, no, growing concern on the impact of the pandemic crisis. A few others mentioned the need to be more calm and patient during the crisis situation by adapting the new normal lifestyle. Nevertheless, as noted earlier, online messaging, no, maybe I haven't mentioned this, but it's obvious that teleconferencing like via Zoom or through Facebook still help mitigate their worries through constant monitoring and regular communication. However, this is not always the case for those who have no access, who have no internet access. No? So in the next slide, I still have, I guess, a few minutes to wrap this up. Obviously, we can see that there is what we call, I guess our discussants would have a better discussion on this, or better understanding. In this slide, I'm just highlighting the general policies that are indirectly contributing, no, to the betterment of migrants and their families. And indeed, there is what we call migration governance, which is very intertwined in Philippine society. And studies would indicate, or even the IOM would somehow show this, that IOM and other organization would call this as the Migration Governance Index. And in their study, it concludes that as migrant sending country, the Philippines has a well-developed policy and institutional architecture for managing outward migration. So this can be observed in the presence of legal measures that facilitate migration and protect migrant workers. At the national level, the executive branch of government covers a wide range of offices and agencies which offer services to OFWs, while in the realm of the lawmaking process of the government, various committees address the predicament of the OFWs both in Congress down to the city and to the municipal councils or the local legislatures. So you can see this in the at the national level. You have their Office of the President, Commission on Filipinos Overseas, the Department of Labor and Employment, or the Department of Foreign Affairs. You'll be surprised that in DFA they have an office of the Undersecretary for or USEC for Migrant Workers Affairs, and Department of Justice, OWA, and the Interagency Council Against Trafficking, National Reintegration Center for OFWs. So I guess you can also share on the chat, no? Maybe our key informant is not able to fully elaborate, but maybe the concern of RJ, no, or Anak OFW representative, he shared. You can see that in the chat. Maybe that's a very really very revealing a sharing of our key informant. Thank you for that. Okay, so in the next slide, yeah, I'm showing you again here just to validate, no, verify that aside from the Migration Governance Index, there is also an obvious proof that in terms of legal instruments for the protection of children's rights, because we are covering the concern of the children left behind. These are what we call existing initiatives and mechanisms, no? And aside from the Migrant Workers and Overseas Filipinos Act of 1995 and amended several times, including RA 122, which further improves the standard of protection and promotion to the welfare of the migrant workers, their families, and overseas Filipinos in distress, among others. You can see that in terms of the national government, it has laid institutional foundation for the strategic plan, no, for development and for children. So we call other scholars, or even in the development work, they call this Child 21, as indicated in the SWD Administrative Order number 21, that ultimately set the framework for planning programs and interventions that promote and safeguard the rights of Filipino children. So as an offshoot of such framework plans, the government also came up with 5-year plan, no, to, for instance, include to end violence against children. And even in DepEd, you can see that child protection policy. So obviously government, and even at the LGU level, we have promoted child-friendly cities initiatives, and this is supported by or conferred by the Council for the Welfare of Children. All of these policies and planning initiative, both at the national and local levels, thus prove the strong commitment of the government to adhere to the UN conventions and other international commitments. So it's obvious. You can see this in this really myriad laws covering addressing the concern of the children in general, and even perhaps our representative from the executive director, Ma'am Inurisa, could give further discussion later on this, on the protection for children in general. So in the next slide, so I guess I'm over time. So obviously, just to jump, no, on the concern about the so-called cordon sanitaire or restricted movement. which originally denoting a barrier used to stop the spread of infectious diseases. This has been in the pre-war era. Historically, migrants are seen as needed but unwanted, no? So I'm just looking at this situation. Through time, they are seen as panic buttons when things go awry or when there is societal crisis, as they are treated as outsiders and undesirables. You can see this growing concern right now, no, in the US, in Europe, the hate crime against Asians, etc. And it's not to say that this is something new. This has been actually a concern even decades ago. And even during the age of voyages and exploration, itinerants and immigrants had to undergo strict inspection before they are allowed in their ports of entry. Today, this similarly situated scenario can be seen across receiving countries of migration or destination countries. This is now again happening in Singapore and Malaysia, where temporary workers are being subjected to discrimination to access of social services. Undocumented migrants, in particular, if caught, suffer immediate deportation or worse, detention in cramped facilities that only make them more vulnerable to get infected by COVID-19. Again, as shown in these illustrations, migrants suffer especially in difficult circumstances. So I'm showing you the case of FWs in UK and Saudi Arabia. In the next slide, no, the undocumented cases in UK. Next slide, please. So I'm just gonna run through. So, despite this concern about where does this lead to? No, the concern of the migrants being harassed, being subjected to discrimination. There are on at the end of the tunnel, there is actually some good or positive initiatives at the national, local, and even at the NGO, CSO volunteer work, like what Mindanao Migrant Center for Empowering Actions is doing, and even our overseas worker, OWA, no, Overseas Worker Welfare Administration had also provided assistance to FWs. In the next slide, you can see also that in the next slide, Mark. Okay, even CHED proposes. These are just I don't know. I don't want to call motherhood statement that, but they stated it's in social media and in the public, no, in terms of support for OFWs. Okay, next slide. Yeah, this one is actually can be accessed in the website of the Department of Labor, no, the Assistance Information System. Next slide, please. Okay. So on this part, in terms of the question about returning migration, returnees, no, return migration, because others are actually forced by their situation, or even worse, deported to go back to come back home. And the COVID-19 pandemic prompted the return of over 327,000 OFWs last year, no, and the question is there really a strategic, long-term policy on return migration? And I cited the work of Dr. Asis on this, the concern about the cycle of migration, no? And I guess I'm just gonna end up with a few slides here. Yeah, this part, in summary, I would like to just briefly state that in case of the Philippines, there is indeed a fair share of both national and local policies that seemingly address the concerns of migrants and their families. But when it comes to the specific question about left behind children, this remains the question. On the other hand, scholars have pointed out how many of these children keep longing for their mothers or fathers when they see other children or classmates with normal, quote unquote, family arrangement at social gatherings in schools and in public. Societal and peer pressure could lead to depression and absenteeism at school. Nevertheless, digital communications and other online platforms could also help, but they need a personal touch. No? So this is what is lacking in the virtual platforms. In any case, to possibly address the emotional and behavioral problems of the left behind or stay behind children, effective and innovative mechanisms such as mental health interventions, strategies, as well as educational enrichment programs, both for left behind children and their teachers, are to be had. In addition, the Philippine government, in fact, also with the support of the civil society organizations, have pushed for well-meaning policies and improvements. But on a final note, given the limited time, the Philippine government should rethink its policy on encouraging migration abroad. We must learn from policy failures or policy paralysis from the previous experiences that we had. And I guess this is really a very pressing concern, especially during this pandemic crisis. This global pandemic crisis actually proves the argument of scholars like Cassels that non-migration policies may be more powerful in shaping migration than are migration policies. There is indeed a need to encourage more OFWs to engage in entrepreneurial businesses here at home or generate jobs and industries for local development instead of encouraging migrants to return for work abroad. So I guess I'll just end up from there, and maybe we can give more room for discussions later. Daghang salamat. Terima kasih. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Thank you so much, Dr. Villa, for that wonderful presentation. And indeed, it is a really matter that we need to discuss right now, especially that in your presentation, you have emphasized that the biggest chunk of the economy of the Philippines are relying to remittances, and that our overseas Filipino workers are all over the world. Now, to also clarify some things during the presentation of our earlier speaker, RJ, he due to the technical difficulties in the internet connection, he was about to say that he wants to appeal to create laws, programs, and services of the government, and that they shouldn't be forgotten about these programs when we pattern it to migration policies and infrastructure, which was also highlighted by Dr. Anderson Villa in his presentation. Now, to provide a tie-up of the two presentations and to provide validation, let's have the Executive Director of Mindanao Migrant Center for Empowering Actions, or MMCEAI, Ms. Inorisa Elento. Ms. Inorisa?
Good afternoon to all.
Good afternoon. We can hear you.
So first, I would like to say something that the net connection is really a challenge here in Davao City. But anyway, we'll try to cope up with the presentation of the data. Can I have the presentation, or I do the screen sharing myself? Okay. So what I will be presenting would be part of the validation of what RJ has presented a while ago, and also that of research paper of Dr. Andy Villar. No? So specifically on the situation of the OFWs, their families in times of the COVID pandemic. And can I have the second slide, please? So first, I would like to present a profile of the OFWs. Then later on with the left behind families. So the presentation that I will be sharing now was called out from a rapid needs assessment that we conducted in the 8 communities in Davao City. These are the 8 partner communities of Mindanao migrants, where we actively engage migrants and the left behind families. So the data that I will be presenting to you was really coming from those from the families themselves, no, and also for those who were able to reach us at the time of the COVID pandemic through online or through social media. So as shared, the problems that was presented by the OFW was already uh, originated even in the pre-departure. So there were complaints that deployments were canceled and stranded because immediately after the lockdown, uh, all the other OFW who are bound or who are scheduled to fly to other countries are now being stranded in the Philippines. But it is also ironical that recruitment activities continue in communities. So this is also a very challenging part of us, the civil society organization, and also of that of the barangay local government units to look into the recruitment activities even during the COVID pandemic. While on the on-site, the issue of job loss or retrenchment is also been a problem being raised by OFW who have reported to their left behind families here. Reduced wages or even non-payment of wages is also another. Health and safety concerns because they themselves are also been affected by the dilemma that eventually they will be infected with the COVID. And here comes the violence and harassment. Even before the pandemic, the issue of violence and harassment in workplace is already been a problem. But during the pandemic, issues like sexual and physical assault has also been reported even to their families here, which is also when we accounted. The lack of social security, the issue of labor rights violation, because the employers are now staying in the house because of the lockdown in the respective countries, our migrant workers are also facing higher workloads, long working hours, and they even have been a problem also of communication blackout. There's also a report of confiscation of personal documents like passport and other things. Stigmatization and being subjected to verbal and physical assault and other forms of discrimination is also a problem that they've been sharing. Discriminated as a potential source of infection and has been excluded from necessary aid both from host countries and home country. So, and the issue of being stranded and empty-handed is also a problem. Repatriation was doubly difficult for those who were stranded before the declaration of the lockdown because repatriation has been prioritized for those being directly affected during the COVID. So if you have complaints or if you have been reaching the embassy to request for repatriation before the lockdown, then you have become the second priority of those to be repatriated. In times of the return or reintegration, the problem of health and safety concern is also a problem. Mental health, especially for those being repatriated, is number one concern, no, of our OFWs. And the most dramatic problems of our OFW that unemployment or no economic opportunity has been an issue of concern. Next slide, please. So now may I share to you some of the narratives of our left behind families and the Anak OFW. So before I have to present these slides, I would like to raise the point that Mindanao Migrants has a special program for the Anak OFW and on the issue of child protection. But we are also raising a concern and a program to look for the empowerment of our children. So during the time of the sharing of RJ, since we have a problem with net here, he was actually appealing to all, including us, civil society organization, not just the government, that if ever there are programs and services for migration, let us not forget them. Let us not forget their situation. That is what he was saying a while ago, that was not captured because of the net problem. And speaking of the Anak OFW program of the Mindanao Migrant Center, so we have 8 community partners here in Davao City, meaning we have a community Anak OFW associations. And this organization has been working on different aspects. Most are peer-to-peer activities, and we also are also tracking the situation of our migrant workers, particularly that of the Anak FW. So going back to my presentation, I will also share more later when I present the Anak FW. Let me share to you also some of the situation which was shared to us by the left behind families during the pandemic. So this is referring to the peak of the lockdown. No? So the families who are generally being dependent of remittance, they were complaining of reduced and or no remittance from their OFW. So we can just also imagine if our OFW there in the on-site was also retrenched and don't have remittance to send to their family. So the reduced and or no remittance. No on our limited economic activity because they are more dependent also of the remittance. They are also sharing the problems with their OFW because they are also stigmatized and being subjected to verbal and other forms of discrimination. So even though if the OFW is still on site, the fact that you are an OFW family here, so you had been isolated, partly isolated because they thought, especially if that this OFW been repatriated integrates to the family, so they become isolated, no, in the community. So, and second is that the next is that there had been discrimination in availing assistance. So food packs, which was been distributed by the government, OFW families, particularly left behind families, has been the last priority to receive food packs, no, from the government. And we can understand based on the sharing of barangay local government units, because of the limited number of food packs that to be distributed in a big number of people in the community, the least that they will consider to not be considered are the OFW, because of the idea that OFWs have money or are economically more stable compared with the others. So even the issue of availing the fund facility of the social amelioration program, yeah. So this supposedly is a fund facility that has been distributed during the COVID pandemic. So most of the OFW families do not receive this fund facility. There's also a problem of mobility restriction for Anak OFW, especially for ages below 15 years old. And Anak OFW are hooked to internet activities, social media, online games, and become more vulnerable to online sexual exploitation to children and young people. As Dr. Andy was also presented a while ago, I would like to really say thank you to you, Dr. Andy, because the recognition that the left, when we talk about programs and services on migration and development, we could also you never forget that it has to be factored in, no, the issues and concern of left behind families, and that also of the Anak FW. So thank you for that. And in pursuing our actions and advocacy, we we never have to forget also that they have their own voice to be considered also. So among the issues of the anak OFW during the COVID pandemic is that there are a number of anak OFW who are living alone. These are minors living alone. And one case of that is RJ, RJ Dakop, our speaker, our first speaker. He belongs to, they were 4 siblings and they were living alone without adults. So this is also a concern during the pandemic because the restriction of going out to for their needs and other needs. So it's also a problem. The issues of abandoned families of OFWs and on that particular, as we are also have we are also expecting Japinos to be one of our speakers. One of the concerns here in Davao is the issues of the abandoned families of OFWs. And a number of these are abandoned by Japanese national fathers. There were a number of case that we handled here with Mindanao Migrant Center on the issues of getting economic support and also of eventually reunifying with their Japanese fathers, who have been separated a while ago, for a longer time, with their children here in the Philippines. The issue of children with special needs. There are children that also need some. Most of them are how do you say this? The special needs physically and also mentally. So in times of the COVID pandemic, the direct support and assistance is also a challenge. Even during the COVID pandemic, the issue of sexual assault, incest, and rape is also a problem. So we have a documented case now that children of migrant workers who are even in their homes has also experienced some sexual assault. Physical assault also because children at the time of the COVID pandemic who at their state who are quite mobile, very energetic, and they would like to go out to explore some things, also suffer some physical assault. No, so they have problems with they've been arrested and they will be mauled, by adults, and that is also a concern. And also the issue of teenage pregnancy. At the time of the COVID pandemic, concerns of teenage pregnancy is also one. And particularly here in Davao City, I think we are still on the top list of the number of teenage pregnancy of the whole country. And Davao is not also, and the anak FW cases is also a part of that number. And there are also children involved in petty crimes, gang wars, and drugs. So these are problems which are also been very uh, real in times of the COVID pandemic. Next slide, please. I only have one slide. And here are the, I just have to present these recommendations. These are recommendations that we called out during the rapid needs assessment. So one is that from the OFW sides, the provision of humanitarian assistance and establishment of health and safety protocols, social protection both for returning OFWs and those who opted to stay behind in host countries, because there are also some who would like to stay in the host countries. Provision of local employment opportunities for returning OFWs to sustain their livelihood with local employment. The installation of tracking system both in on-site and return. And for the left behind families, there's also these issues like installation of community-based tracking information should be strengthened, and that the BLGU should also look at it as a concern especially that recruitment activities during the pandemic is still very active. The inclusion and provision of food assistance for OFW because it has been excluded, and livelihood opportunities for families, the establishment of health and safety protocols, and the provision of welfare support. So yes, I think the last slides. And salamat. Thank you. And salamat kayo.
Salamat kaayo, Miss Anarisa, for that very wonderful and comprehensive presentation and for patching up the two things or the two presentations that has been given to us a while ago. Now, at this moment, we are going to proceed in the second part of our program, which we invited discussants from different parts of Philippines and the world actually, where they need to react on what has been presented. Each of the discussants will be given 10 minutes. And again, if you have any questions, clarifications to any of our speakers, feel free to send them over in the Zoom chat or the Q&A chat box, and please indicate to which speaker or speakers you are addressing it to. For our first discussant, let us welcome the Director of Scalabrini Migration Center, Dr. Maruha Asis. Dr. Marla?
Yes, thank you. Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you
Okay.
clearly.
Yes, thanks very much. And first of all, I'd like to greet everyone a very good afternoon. And I'd like to thank the organizers for putting this webinar together and for inviting SMC to be part of this conversation. I really like the presentations that were made earlier because they gave us, the presentations gave us different levels of appreciating the impact of the pandemic on the families left behind. So Dr. Andy talked about the national framework, and then the presentation of Ms. Nori provided the local framework, what is going on in Davao, which is really very important because I do believe that at this point, and especially with the crisis and the challenge that we are being presented with at the moment, a local perspective is very important. And I will go back to that point later. And thank you very much, of course, to the sharing of RJ. It was indeed a very personal experience, and he was really very brave. And actually, when he made the presentation, my heart went out to him because he's a young person and he's also in charge not only of himself, taking care of himself, but also I understand he has 3 other siblings that he has to take care of. I do have one hopeful note that I noted in the presentation of RJ, and that is, I think he mentioned the support and assistance, the checking in that their neighbors, the neighbors around them acted on, so just to make sure that the family of children, the family of minors, that they are doing very well. I think what I'd like to do by way of maybe making some additional points and also some points for discussion is just to highlight the need to really coordinate the national framework, national policies, and national institutions with what is going on at the local level. As I mentioned earlier on, I really appreciated the local perspective that was presented by Ms. Nori because especially in this pandemic when there's a huge amount of repatriation that went on. I think last week, the Department of Labor and Employment mentioned that there were already some 500,000, close to 500,000 of Filipinos who were repatriated back to the Philippines. That's a large number. The largest number of repatriated OFWs that we have experienced in our close to 50 years of large-scale international labor migration. And in the end, we will ask, saan ba sila pupunta? No? They are not going to congregate here in Metro Manila. People are going to return to where they came from. And that's at the local level. So the local government units and local communities are really the locus of where the action is going to be when we have to think of what is going to happen after repatriation. Okay? So in our experience, after almost a year of repatriation, I think the Philippine government started repatriating overseas Filipino workers towards the end of February. So nakaisang taon na po tayo. And actually, indeed, in the early months of repatriation, there was a lot of hits and misses. No, maraming mga naging problema doon sa repatriation. But by around June, when the Department of Labor and Employment already instituted OASIS, the Overseas Assistance Information System. This was mentioned in the presentation of Dr. Andy, the OASIS database. Somehow, some order on how the repatriation process is going to be like, some order was achieved. So much so that by June or July, the discussions already focused on reintegration. What do we do with the people who have returned? Nagustuhan ko rin, I also liked the outline that Ms. Nori presented, that actually when we think of OFWs that are affected by the pandemic, it's not only the repatriated workers really that are at the focus of our attention. Maano yan eh, it's a diverse population. You have the stranded individuals, those who were about to leave for their contracts, and then with the high hopes that, oh my goodness, they're going to work abroad and they will be able to provide better for their families. Naudlot po yun, no? That was interrupted by the pandemic. And then there's also the case of those who are stranded. They are based abroad, about to return to the Philippines, but they were stranded, particularly in the hard lockdown months of April to May. No? They were stranded, and this is the case of our seafarers and also fishermen, no? Because they were doing what is known as essential work, and then there was lockdown all over the world. It was very difficult for them to return to the Philippines. No? So, and also even for those who were able to retain their work overseas. An example of that would be the mother of RJ. No? She continues to work in Kuwait. We also wonder, under what conditions kaya? No? Under what conditions are the people who continue to work abroad, under what conditions do they find themselves? No? Do they get their salaries on time? Are they being treated well by their employers? So there's also a lot of factors there. So on the one hand, we can say that RJ's mom is one of the fortunate OFWs who continue to have her work. But then we also really have to be concerned. We hope that she's doing well. We hope that her working conditions are okay. We heard also from RJ that the mom continues to send them remittances. And that has also been the story of many OFWs who are able to continue to work abroad. And so they are able to continue to support their family members who are left behind here. Okay? But we also heard from RJ, no, from a child's perspective, the concerns and the worries that he has. No? Kumusta kaya yung nanay niya doon? No? Hopefully the mother will not contract any illness, because otherwise, that would also be a source of major anxiety for the young children who are left behind. So this, the impact of the pandemic really is at all fronts. No? For many families whose family members abroad have lost their jobs or they were displaced, it's really an economic crisis for them. And then upon returning to the Philippines, the prospects are not very bright either. No? So they also join the large numbers of Filipinos who have lost their jobs and who have been displaced. But nonetheless, no, siguro I'd also like to look at things from a certain perspective. No? I'd actually like to ask also the reaction of Ms. Nori and Dr. Andy to this, no? And maybe our other discussants and speakers here. Kasi sa tingin ko, despite the fact that there are many gaps in the programs and services that are provided by the Philippine government to the OFW sector, in a general sense, no? The OFW sector actually is getting more support compared to other people. Okay. I think, for example, as a comparison, no, the kinds of assistance or lack thereof, lack of support that is given to the locally stranded individuals. parang wala eh. Parang wala akong masyadong naririnig, no? So I also worry about that part, no, na syempre sa OFW sector we can pinpoint certain limitations, weaknesses and gaps. But you know, when I turn my gaze to the locally stranded individuals, ano ba yung support that they're getting? So I also wonder about that. Now, going back to the situation at the local government level and at the level of communities. Again, when people return to their home communities, the question is, what is it in there for them? No? Are there economic opportunities, no, for returnees, for those repatriated, for those for the repatriated OFWs who might not be able to find overseas employment for some time? No? And that's why I was quite worried when Ms. Nori mentioned that in the communities, recruitment activities continue. I really wonder, what are they recruiting for? No? Because when we had discussions, for example, with the POEA in one of our webinars last year, you know, if we think about the possible job prospects are very limited, largely in the healthcare sector, for which there was a ban last year. And the ban was just lifted this January. And to some extent, the seafaring sector. Okay? But for those in the seafaring sector who are working or who used to work in the cruise ship industry, that is going to be down for a very long time. So somehow, I hope also that at the level of communities, at the level of local governments, there will also be a lot of discussions about employment prospects. And what are the limitations? What are the limitations in the global labor market demand that people have to be aware of, so that this could also alert them to possibilities of being illegally recruited. No? Nakakatakot po kasi yun, na yung because people, of course, are kind of desperate to hold on to the possibility of having employment. So there might be many cases of kapit sa patalim. So we really have to work, no, in our communities so that those issues will not crop up. So I think as a final thought, I think what we really have to do is look at the prospects. What are some of the possibilities that we can offer within local communities? And possibly in this area, maybe agriculture might be one of those possibilities. It's not going to be easy, no? But it offers some possibilities for potential involvement. And I'd also just like to conclude what also Ms. Nori said earlier, that this is a time for us to work together, for synergy between national and local governments, and also within communities, the participation of different stakeholders, and not to forget the participation of migrants themselves, and including their children. So I think I'll just end with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Marla Asis, for that wonderful and very comprehensive discussion on the things that we got from our speakers. And then she actually emphasized on using the local perspective and resolving a cross-border problem, such as what we are currently facing and resolving in this seminar forum. Thank you again. And our next discussant has recently graduated his master's degree from Central European University in Budapest, Hungary. And he's currently a lecturer at Ateneo de Davao University. Please welcome Mr. Ian Durf Salvania. Ian?
Hi, good afternoon. It's a bit rowdy here, and I'm living near the highway, so if it's a bit noisy, just please bear with me. I'm still trying to navigate with this virtual setup. So anyway, good afternoon. And before I start, I would just like to thank the organizers of this forum for having this important discussion on migration, and also for inviting me, Sir Andy's office at the MSU Gensan, the Ateneo Migration Center, Sasakawa Peace Foundation in Japan, as well as the Human Rights Working Group in Indonesia. So my research work at Central European University dwells with the idea of mobility as a basic capability, right? And wherein the value of mobility depends on the right to move, the ability to move, and of course the option not to move, which is very, very important. And this discussion, I think, is very apt when we discuss migration issues in the Philippines, particularly migration forced by dire economic circumstances involving the lack of basic capability that helps migrants lead the lives they want. So my discussion for this forum heavily banks on my research at CEU, and I will attempt to contribute to our discussion not so much on the concern of left behind families, since I can't comment too much on this topic given my limited knowledge, but maybe contribute by sharing on one hand the larger political economic concern on the persistence of labor migration in the Philippines. Why is labor migration in the Philippines still persistent? And on the other hand, just shortly, the concern of restrictive movement, which was partly touched by Sir Andy earlier. So just to briefly on the historical background of labor migration in the Philippines. So massive labor migration in the Philippines has been persistent in the past decades, as we've known, right? And this has been mainly provoked, or at least in part, largely provoked by the country's weak economy, continually suffering from insufficient regular jobs, work compensation packages, and policies that ought to provide and protect the welfare of laborers. However, in most cases, migrants escape precarious work only to end up in more precarity, endangering their lives, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've known all of these, especially through the media, and the media has plagued us with reports on countless deaths of OFWs, right? And these OFWs supposedly intended to seek greener pastures in the first place. Among them, Flor Contemplacion, for example, hanged to death in 1995, right, after allegedly being tortured to accept blame for a murder case. We also have Joanna Di Mafelis, whose body was recovered in a freezer of an abandoned apartment in Kuwait in 2018 after being tortured and strangled by her Lebanese and Syrian employers. And recently, Jeneline Villavende, who suffered from sexual abuses in the months before she was murdered, still in Kuwait in December 2019. And these and many more abuses pose vulnerability among OFWs spread around the world, particularly those in authoritarian states such as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, right? And going back to the historical roots of this persistence of labor migration in our country, temporary labor migration gained considerable attention in the 1970s among Asian countries as I quote rather in 2016, I think, as a stopgap, right? Stopgap measure, while governments are trying to implement policy reform to whip their economies into shape, end of quote. And this has been especially observed in countries such as China, India, and the Philippines during this time, few of the biggest labor sending countries in the world. However, while the encouragement of labor migration in the first two countries, China and India, are temporary and has largely faded in many other Asian countries during the time neighboring the Philippines, the temporary Philippine labor strategy has stretched up to 4 decades and into a new administration that promises to help ease the issues of labor migration by ending contractualization on the one hand, and two, providing better reintegration programs for OFWs to come back to the domestic labor economy. And this is supposed to be backed up with, greater cooperation between the Philippines and states receiving migrants. And would also like to briefly mention a research from Doc Marla on migration in the Gulf states, right? Now, however, our country has yet to see the effects of this administration's promises, especially when Duterte, for example, campaigned during the 2016 presidential elections for the insurance of migrant welfare, right? Additionally, instead of making migration, and to quote him, optional and not necessary, end of quote, in the initial days after he assumed office, the president's promise made a reverse turn, that is, and I quote Migrant International on this, turning back to, quote, the same neoliberal policy of labor export when it comes to peddling Filipinos' cheap and docile labor to the global market, end of quote. Now, although these are various commitments, although there are various commitments that have been written and signed into law by the Philippine government, all of these only lead, not if not all, then maybe mostly only lead to the promotion of labor export and never, I think, to curbing the root causes of the weak economy leading to forced migration. And this issue persists until now because the government, the Philippine government, lacks, I think, the necessary long-term answers to structural issues of the economy intertwined with poverty and corruption. And we have a lot of recommendations, policy recommendation strategies out there already. And I would just like to mention one. I think in 2011, ex-NEDA chief Ernesto Pernia claimed that there are two twin policy mistakes. I'm quoting him, that our country needs to solve in order for the problems or the persistence of labor migration to at least be lessened, if not really fully solved. First, a long-lived import substitution industrialization policy, whose protectionist policy instruments probably helped nurture the culture of corruption permeating the Filipino social fabric. And second, on a micro level, a short-lived population policy, which I think led to the excess of cheap labor supply, desperately seeking for few demands of jobs in the Philippines' domestic economy. This is also to re-echo what Sir Andy has stated, particularly in the last part of his research report on the question of repatriation and whether or not our country has, given sufficient legal strategies, policy strategies that can cater the reintegration program for migrants that going back to our country will sustain their livelihood. So that's for the one hand. On the other hand, just shortly on the concern of restrictive movement, which was partly touched by Sir Andy earlier. Just very briefly, since I was also stranded as an expat student in Europe, when Europe was declared the epicenter of COVID-19, I think in around April last year, we were just mulling over, the feeling of not really being prioritized with the kind of support EU citizens are receiving from the governments, because I was in Hungary that time. And while we're at this, I think I would just like to point out the case of Portugal, right, which recently really stood out when we talk about the protection and promotion of migrant rights and welfare. And now that the migration discussions I've attended recently, the Portugal case has really been very famous, consistently being praised. And I think the reason is that it's a model that many countries can follow, especially during these times of crisis, which Sir Andy also mentioned earlier, when migrants feel that they're second-class citizens because they're put on the margins because they're not really citizens of the receiving states, and that they're needed but they're unwanted. So I would just like to close that discussion and maybe open up some more on capabilities, on mobilities, on even the agencies of migrant workers and how these positionings being situated abroad, especially during this pandemic, affects the lives that they want as well as the lives their families want to lead. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. He actually emphasized on mapping out the problems not only in the Philippines, calling for action to also the neighboring countries because of the geographical propinquity of the neighboring countries lacking the economic opportunities thereof. Thank you, Ian. And now let's proceed to our next and the last discussion for today. She is a PhD candidate in Ritsumeikan University in Japan and a lecturer in Al-Azhar University in Indonesia. Please welcome Yusi Widarahesti. Yusi?
Okay. Hello. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for the organizers. Thank you very much for having me and inviting me to this valuable event. And I would like to introduce myself. And my name is Yusi, and currently I enroll as a PhD student in Ritsumeikan University. And my research topic is actually about the technical intern trainee program, Indonesian migrant workers in Japan. So I also actually don't have much knowledge about these issues. So in this case, I would like just to share my informations about Japan's the situations in Japan. So as we know that migrations, if properly managed, can contribute to poverty alleviations and the growth and prosperity, not only of individuals, but also of both countries of origin and destinations. And however, it is also crucial to acknowledge that the reality of this movement of the people has the incredible impacts manifest in the outcome of not just individual, but entire of villages, cities, and countries. And one of the important consequences of parental migration is the impact of life children behind. So in this case, maybe I just would like to share the informations regarding the situations and conditions in Japan. If we try to learn from Japan as one of the example in the Asian country as a growing country, actually from the historical perspective, Japan also has an experience as a sending country. In the agriculture sectors and also in the factory until the 1950, and then Japan also continued to send the workers abroad in conjunctions with the expansions of the Japanese companies abroad. And this worker sending in Japan to abroad is also used to call as the Sansin Funin, or an accompanied job transfer in which a male employee moved to another city or even another country to work and leave their families behind. So same with other sending countries like Philippines and also Indonesia. Japan at that time is also facing many complicated impacts such as loneliness, mental health issues, mother and children depressions, and also living alone elderly. So meanwhile, in the current situations, as we acknowledge that Japan Immigration Control and Refugee Recognition Act was also revised in April in 2019 and launching a policy under which Japan will accept more foreign workers from Southeast Asian countries such as Philippines, Indonesians, Vietnams, and other countries. But in spite of this development, news stories concerning various human rights violations, including harsh working conditions, have continued to emerge. So meanwhile, also for the family migrant workers in Japan, kind of like the Filipino children and also Indonesian children in Japan, also facing many difficulties and issues such as communications issues, school cultures and rules, limited Japanese language supported, bullying, and also lack of information of multicultural knowledge from the teachers in the Japan. So although the number of multicultural students is estimated to increase in educational circumstances in Japan for each children, we still have various kind of issues where children and their family also face the communications issue. So in this case, I would like to point out that Japan as a growing country also facing the same failure such as the developing country like Indonesians and Philippines in dealing with protecting the rights of children of migrant workers as well. So I just would like to ask maybe for all the speakers here, what is actually the cause of the failures between the discourses from the governmental level to meet with the actual implementations in the grounds? So we can learn from, actually we can also learn from the failure from the growing country like Japan's and also European country in dealing with the migrant workers' rights. So what is actually the gap of the discourses between the government level with the implementations in the grounds, and what we need to do to fill the hole of this kind of gap as well? So I think I just would like to raise the critical questions about the discourses, and then also considering the capability approach, maybe to pay attention, like freedom refers to the environment, means how can we improve the fulfillment of the rights of the migrant children in all over the globe, I think. I think that's all from me. Thank you very much for the invitations. I'm sorry for my limitations knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, UC, and thank you for sharing the policy of Japan, to which you draw your argument that the Southeast Asian countries can learn from. And now we will move on to the next part of our program, where we will entertain the questions that you have in mind, and those of you who already sent your questions right off our Q&A box and chat box. These presentations earlier that was given will be synthesized, and the questions that you have all throughout the discussion will be given and moderated by the Director of Ateneo Migration Center, Ms. Diana Carmela Labra. Ms. Diana, would you like to take over for our question and answer portion?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Just to give us a short synthesis on the discussions. So, Dr. Aziz talks about that there is a need to coordinate the national framework, the policies, the institutions at the local level, because local communities is the locus of action. Further, she said that there are many gaps in the OFW sector, but the OFWs are relatively given more assistance compared to other sectors. Further, she hopes for more discussions on employment sectors and limitations in the global employment demand. And she said that agriculture can be one of the possibilities for employment. Mr. Salvania said that while mobility is a capability, the administration's commitment only led to the promotion of labor export instead of curbing the structural issues in our country. Further, he said that the country is not living up to its promise in protecting its citizens who are working abroad. Ms. UC said that migration contributes to poverty alleviation, but however, one of its impacts is its effect on the children left behind. In the case of Japan, it was historically a sending country, but then even though Japan's policies were revised, despite that, undesirable working conditions still persist. She went further to say that Japan was a growing country facing the same situation as the Philippines and Indonesia, but then what can be learned from it is that there were gaps in the discourses between the government and the implementation, and also what we can learn from it is we should develop the capabilities and skills of the lives of the children left behind. So to move on to our open forum, we have questions from the audience, from the participants. We have one from Dr. Marla Asis of Scalabrini Migration Center. So this is for RJ, the anak OFW. So question RJ, did you receive, or did in general the anak OFWs receive any support from the government? I hope RJ is still here to answer the query. Okay.
Pakibalik daw, Ma'am Diana.
Okay. One participant.
I-translate ko na si Maya.
Okay. One participant was asking, so Dr. Asis was asking, did you receive, or in general, did the anak OFW receive any support from the government? So ang sa imuhang experience, RJ, naa ba kay nadawat gikan sa gobyerno?
Napod kay kanan sa barangay lang.
Unsa man na sila?
Kanang ayuda, hanggang may hinabang lang sa barangay gikan.
Sa barangay gikan, naghatag sila mga ayuda sa inyong pamilya. Okay. Specifically kanang sa imo bilang anak OFW, aside from sa ayuda, naa pa ba?
Maulang na.
Maulang kung ayuda lang. Okay. Thank you, RJ, for answering that. So RJ said that it is only the relief goods, or the so-called ayuda, was given by the government during the pandemic. Okay, thank you. Another question from the participant, Dr. Vida Mia Valverde of Ateneo de Davao University. This is, I guess, for everyone, for anyone who can answer, what are the significant and quantifiable impacts of the feminization of migration? And how has this recognition of feminization changed or deepened our understanding of migration? I guess Dr. Villa can answer this question, sir. Sir Andy.
Thank you. I'm trying to review the question. Is she from professor? Professor from Ateneo?
Yes,
Uh,
sir.
so quantifiable impacts of the feminization, it's really a very economic question, and then maybe statistical question, right? In terms of the impact of feminization of migration. And that's a good question actually, because as I mentioned a while ago, we are commemorating the celebration of the Women's Month. And I guess the first step is for us to recognize that there is really an increasing number of migrants, mostly mother migrants, who are moving abroad, who are actually not just maybe moving but thinking of also working abroad, no? And we can in my study, was able to, I mean, the perhaps Ma'am Nori could also share something about the impact. I cannot really say quantify, but more on the qualitative side, no, of expressing their pent up emotion, in terms of mental or psychological well-being of the children left behind. And maybe this is really a huge concern that some, I mean, I hope with in the case of RJ, he is able to cope up. But the grandparents or those who are significant others would rather, fill the void when mothers or women leave for work abroad. And um, uh, in terms of recognizing the feminization, yeah, we have to look at the growing, the growing concern at the global level, as mentioned by Sir Ian a while ago, that there seem to be a movement. It's not just because they want to move, but there is also a demand. So that means the women are able to see, to identify, rationally, that there is a demand from receiving country. That means at the political economic perspective, at the global level, uh, industries would demand for women to work, no, in the factory, or not just in the factory, but mostly in the household work right now. So like as domestic workers. So that means there is a transition that is happening now in industrialized country, when women are given the chance. So we have to think about the feminization and the, in times of industrialization or post-industrialization, where women are given the opportunities, no, in receiving country, in industrialized countries, they can now work. But now they have problem with taking care of the children. So who's going to work in the household, because they're going to leave for work, they're given opportunities to work in their country. Now this host country demand more in terms of domestic workers. So ito yung challenge, no, kasi there is a demand at the global level, and the problem is the mothers, especially mothers, especially in the context of Singapore or Hong Kong or even in Saudi Arabia, they would take good care of children of their employers, right? And ironically, leaving their children, uh, uh, it's really a huge sacrifice. Maybe Ma'am Inurisa could somehow share more on this concern.
Yes, ma'am. Anything to add po?
Thank you, Andy and Ma'am Diana. Actually, on the issue of immunization of migration, yes, I think for 3 consecutive years, the profile of migration deployment has that favorably for women. But this migration thing could also be viewed in two sides. No, it could be an opportunity, but also a liability at one. In terms of opportunity, this opens the door for women to engage, in economic activities or even in contributing, to the needs of the family, and also in contributing to keep the economy afloat, in terms of that. But it also is a liability because, for one, the society is not that ready to accept that that women has this opportunity at hand. It is not just the market demand, but it's also that women are also trying to engage in this new arena to explore labor migration upon hand. But a liability that I said is that in terms of protection and in terms of welfare needs of women going out of the country, so this is also kind of not being looked into in terms of addressing the issues of vow immigration. So counting the numbers can really testify that there are numbers of women going out. But in terms of asking, does it really is quantifiable in terms of the benefits to women? So we really have to think that there are also some social cost that is being left to the families here in the Philippines. And I think this is also a concern, not just for those families who have OFWs, but also to the community and the government to look into the issues of the left behind families, particularly for Mindanao Migrant Center. That is why we are trying to engage with the left behind families and also their barangay local government units in coming up with a mechanism of responding to the needs of the left behind. On the case of RJ, I would like to add something that at the time of the COVID pandemic, the issues of providing food packs for the RJ family has not been counted originally. So we tried to facilitate that they will be counted. So there were a number of really so-called indigent OFW, because when you are talking about OFW in times of pandemic, they perceive that this is quite in terms of affluence and economic standing, so they're better off and should be considered the second priority or the last priority. So in the case like that of RJ, we tried to negotiate, we tried to really write something to the local government to consider the issues of the family of RJ, and the same that also of other families left behind during the pandemic.
Okay, that's thank you, Dr. Villa and Ma'am Nori, for those insightful points. So another question from Mr. Artley S. Laug. This is addressed to Dr. Asias, or any speaker can answer. How does the Philippine government secure the possibility that the displaced migrant workers or OFWs will still be able to go back to their respective jobs abroad after this pandemic is over and done? And if they may opt to stay here in our country, can we provide sustainable jobs for them, given that we have limited employment opportunities to begin with? So I guess this is addressed to primarily to Dr. Marlasis. Ma'am?
Actually, it's beyond the government's scope, because it would really depend on how countries of destination would decide about the kinds of workers that they need, and also to what extent their economies or their countries would be open to accepting migrants from other parts of the world. What I do see as emerging is that unlike other crises, unlike the past economic crisis, global crisis that we have experienced, what the pandemic has shown us is that it's giving a lot of emphasis on health as a criterion for mobility, for mobility in general. And what we are also seeing is that migration is getting to be quite costly. So, for example, just having the swab test X number of times as you go through the application process and up to the time that people will depart for work, and then the quarantine that people have to observe. It's not always the case that the employers will pay for will pay the workers' wages during quarantine. So migration is really getting to be quite expensive. And so I think this is also one of the push factors for us, or one of the compelling factors for us to really look inwards and to really look seriously into how we can generate economic activities within the Philippines so that people will have a choice.
Very remarkable point at that. Another question from Justine Ian Doctor. This is addressed to anyone, any speaker or discussant. Good afternoon. Just want to ask, does this mean that the feminization of migration, workers, and OFWs alike is tantamount to the increase on cases of abuse and maltreatment towards OFWs, taking in consideration the cases in the Middle East? So who wants to answer? Dr. Bilia? Sir Andy?
I was pointing to Ma'am Nori because I forgot this is we are on a webinar. Sometimes we think.
Yeah.
Ma'am Nori?
Okay.
Yeah. That's also a good question. I would say that it is not an exemption. I will put it this way. The opportunity for women to go out and work abroad is not of the same plane of looking at the increase of abuses, because it's also like a victim blaming, because you go out of the country, you know that you are vulnerable, then you will become abused. No, it's not like that. The thing that we have to look into when we look up, we should look at feminization of migration as an opportunity, but also a responsibility on us all to support the protection side of this opportunity to women. So it is not an issue that counting the numbers of deployment of women abroad is also counting the abuses, expected abuses for women. No. So it is a challenge, because it is a challenge for all of us, for the government, and for individual who would also like to go abroad. So on the perspective of Mindanao migrants, we would like to invest on the preparation of an individual, whether she is a woman or he who decides to go abroad, that he has to know everything before going out of the country, meaning that he has to know where to run if ever problems arises in that country, or he has to also attend to the preparation of the family, and also to know the laws and the other side when when she also arrives on site. So while this is not a full guarantee that she will not be abused in that country, but at least she has this information where to go and where to call for help if there are problems. So I would say that protecting our women in the case of abuses of going out of the country is not just a sole responsibility of the woman who decides to go abroad, but to all of us, and I would say.
Okay, thank you, Ma'am Nori. Dr. Asis, you want to add something?
Yes, I'd also just like to say that female migration per se is not equal to abuse and exploitation, because migration is part of our choices. It's part of also expanding our worldview. It's part also of having access to economic opportunities and so forth and so on. I think what we have to really take into account is, why is it that there are some occupations that seem to have a high incidence of abuse and exploitation. Okay? So it's a matter of identifying what are occupations that are not protected. No? And even domestic work. Domestic work is not unprotected in all countries. Some countries have laws that protect the rights of domestic workers. And in those countries, domestic workers are, the incidence of abuse is minimal, or at least reduced. No? So it's really a question of, what are the protective mechanisms that are in place? What are the kinds of occupations that are considered as work? So much so that there are safety nets, no, at the different stages and also different facets. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Aziz. Sir Ian, yes, sir.
I think just some speculations. To answer the question, if the increasing feminization of migration is tantamount to abuse, I think it's a hazy generalization. Of course, it's not, right? And we have a lot of intersectionalities to consider. First, I think right now we have an increasing consciousness about the role of women in the world, and we are opening up to accepting and trying to resolve the historical grievances that the world has committed to women, and so that's one factor. Also, Doc Asis also discussed about the varied roles of Doc Asis, as well as Miss Inodisa also discussed about the varied roles of women, those that go outside the country and not necessarily take professions, but even some go abroad for love, because love can also be tantamount to economic prosperity, and this has been studied as well. And if we go back to Dr. Villa's research report on this topic, right? He stated a statistical table on the male and female overseas Filipino workers by occupation. There is, and this is sourced from the Philippine Statistics Authority, there is actually, traditionally, a glaring number of, traditional roles that women take up and men take up as well. For example, elementary occupations, we have 58.7%, right? The women take elementary occupations 58 as compared to 9.8 for male. And reversely, plant and machine operators and assemblers, 2.7% are females. On the other hand, 27.8. This is 2018 statistics. I don't know about the change right now, especially on the impact of COVID-19. So that's another case. Are we really? So I think the question on feminization is how rapid and how do we respond to the kind of roles that women take up or shake things up, right, when it comes to these visions. Also, last point that I would like to discuss, of course, is the role of states, receiving states particularly, and this is discussed by Dr. Ass as well earlier. Just to state, there's a book by Kressler and Rother, and they discuss authoritarian states specifically as more likely to host abuses, right? And this is not only about the legal political implications in the country, but also the cultural understanding of women and their roles in society, especially that you are a woman, coming not from their cultures, but from a different culture, and you are just economically needed, but really socially unwanted. So that's just some points of speculation and rumination.
Thank you, Sir Ian. Okay, so there's an additional question from Mr. Justin Ian, Doctor. Would just like to add if the feminization of migration posits good implication for a certain country. Sir Dan, you want to answer, Sir Dan?
You mean
Who
you
wants-
see? Yeah. let me check again the question. I guess it's a follow-up question. I guess it's been answered, right? There are benefits of feminization of migration, especially for the host country where women, or the receiving country where women cannot, the citizen of that country cannot comply, for instance, certain household concern, and then perhaps that's really a good thing for the recipient country. However, for the sending country like the Philippines and Indonesia, this is an ongoing concern where there is also a growing number of mother migrants, no, and then leaving their families and children back home. So that's really the social cost, as mentioned by Ma'am Nori and Ma'am Marla a while ago. Yeah.
Okay, so I hope that answers the follow-up question of Dr.
For UC, do you want to?
Mr. Justin, yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, so are there any more questions, queries, clarifications? I guess all queries are answered in the chat box. So, okay, thank you participants and speakers for a very engaging discourse. So let's proceed with the next part. Sir Dan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Miss Diana, for that wonderful synthesizing the presentations and for moderating our question and answer portion. Indeed, it is such a fruitful conversation on the problem at hand. And finally, we have come to an end part of our event. But first, before we proceed to that, we would like to have a photo op opportunity with everyone here, because it's a very Filipino thing to have the photo opportunity. So kindly turn on your videos, cameras, so that we could take a picture. And Jess from HRWG will give us a cue on if it's already done. So kindly just smile all throughout, and hopefully we could get a great photo. Okay? So ready on cue?
Okay, I'm with Jess, so I'll
yes,
start.
Daniel, go on.
In bahasa Indonesia ya. 1, 2, 3. Okay, one more time. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you so much.
Mas Ali kapan kak?
Okay. How about the attendees? Are they able to
move here?
Take photo? Maybe we can move all of them.
Move all the participants, yeah. Or closing first, remark
yes.
or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah,
thank
Dan,
you so
have the floor.
Thank you so much, Jess, for and Daniel for that photo opportunity and for handling those things for us. And right now we are going to move forward in the last part of our program, and to formally end this event, may we request Mr. Daniel Awigra from the Human Rights Working Group Indonesia, who worked tirelessly on this cause, by the way, to give his closing remarks. Daniel?
All right. Thank you. Wait a minute. Okay, thank you so much, Dan, Andy, and also Diana, for the wonderful to facilitate this wonderful event. Of course, I'd like to, on behalf of Human Rights Working Group, I'd like to extend our gratitude to the representatives of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, Maho Nakayama, Fumiko Okamoto, and of course, our partner, great partner, Anderson Villa, Andy from Mindanao State University, and also from the Ateneo Migration Center of Ateneo, the Davao University. And of course, for all participants, supposed to be, we have 120 registered participants. Unfortunately, during the discussion, we have only around 50 attended participants. Anyway, it's already aired and also on our Facebook, and also reshared in the Facebook page in the Philippines. So hopefully later on they can also access the discussion. So I'd like to, of course, share our thank you to the Philippines, especially that we are really looking at the example from the Philippines, both in the way the Philippine migrant worker, that they are so much resilient in many countries all over the world. So like they make like a self-help organization in order to better protect migrant worker all over the world, and also the effort of my Filipino government, as well as some initiative, the support from the academia, such as Professor Marla Aziz, also the work like Miss Nori, and of course the young scholar Ayan from the Europe, also UC, my colleague from Indonesia that now she's in Japan. So I'm so happy basically to have this kinds of multi-dimension, multi-stakeholder speakers that we can learn each other. Basically, I couldn't agree more from what has been shared and explained by all amazing speaker and discussion. To end, I'd like to borrow an African proverb. It takes a village to raise a child, basically. So need an effort, the entire village, in order to give, to raise children. It is basically an ideal concept that emphasizes to build an enabling environment to children to get their best interest in order to experience and grow in a safe and healthy environment. During last year, we conducted a baseline study, Stay Behind Children in 3 countries, Indonesia, Myanmar, and the Philippines. And also following the discussion this afternoon, we together have found that the life story of children of migrant workers here are really left behind. So children live in the society, but unfortunately living without the presence of their own parent, can be one of them or can be both of them, due to seek a better life, especially to economic improvement. Of course, now they're becoming one of the most vulnerable group. Instead, giving enough support for the state and the society, they are now a lot of, not just only in the Philippines, also Indonesia, and of course in Myanmar and some other sending country, they are discriminated against and having some serious social issues. We call it social cost of migration, malnutrition, even we have stunting issue, overweight, lack of hygiene, water and sanitation, difficult to afford the education, both on access and on completion, quality of learning process, and so on and so forth, and also including sexual abuses, trafficking, already explained by Mr. Andy. It is, of course, for us in a human rights working group, it's an effort to together with some on other both sending and receiving country to set up an enabling environment of the society to support to the children, especially stay behind children, to get their best interest and trying to seek the root cause of their problem, basically. And of course, in our advocacy, we try to get benefit from both bilateral cooperation, maybe Philippines and Japan, or Indonesia and Japan, and some other sending and receiving country, as well as in the multilateral platforms such as ASEAN, or even cross-regional cooperation such as ASEAN +3. We come up with as a civil society, together with Dr. Andy in the Philippines, one of our steering group, we come up with the movement building. We call it BBC, Better Engagement Between East and Southeast Asia. It is a platform, now it's still online platform, because basically during the COVID, for better connection, understanding, and cooperation on issues among migration cross-regionally. And you can find us in some major social media. So going back to the African proverb, so from the village level, no, I guess the responsibility to raise the children not just necessarily remains on the villagers, but also us as a region in the Southeast Asia, as well as on the receiving countries such as Japan, that of course get a lot of benefit from the work or the labor of migrant worker. So it is our responsibility together in a way we can really support the future generation. I'd like to thank you everybody. Thank you so much once again. I'm so sorry if there is a lack of in order we proceed this event, not really, maximum. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Daniel, Mr. Avigra, for that wonderful closing remarks. And to our distinguished guests, speakers, discussants, and participants, but I would like to thank all of you for participating in this webinar forum. May this event continue to flourish the conversations on the problems of our migrants and their families in the face of the global pandemic. As the Secretary General of the United Nations before once said, Ban Ki-moon, migration is an expression of human aspiration for dignity, safety, and better future. And it is up to us, leading advocates of migration and its studies, and our government to safeguard our freedom of movement. Because as a society, all of us descended from migration, and history tells us that we cannot deter people from fleeing for their lives, but we can always manage their departure and arrival humanely. Again, my name is Don Oliver Riviera, and on behalf of the working committees of this endeavor, the Ateneo Migration Center of Ateneo de Davao University, Mindanao State University General Santos City, Office of International Affairs, and in collaboration with the Human Rights Working Group Indonesia and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, terima kasih, maraming salamat, and thank you for participating in this event.
Everybody already get in the panel, so we can have a photo session. So I'm still working on promoting to the panelists, so we can have
we can stop the YouTube.
All right,
already.
Right. Icha, can you help us to stop on the YouTube?
Arigato gozaimasu.
Arigato gozaimasu. Maho.
Nakayamasa.
Nakayama-san, Okamoto-san.
Hi.
Thank you so much.
Fumiko-san. Arigato gozaimasu.
So we're still live in YouTube, but it's okay. Just only for a picture, I think we can having it. Only a few more, and then.
Anyway, this is shared on our page, so this is going to be increase in terms of viewing. I mean, we'll have more people going to use it.
Okay, you can turn on your camera, everybody, and then we can have a picture together, at least to really support the rights of stay behind children. Okay.
Yeah, hey, these are my students.
Familiar faces, yeah,
Thank
Mr.
you
Andy.
for the continued support.
All right, I will count 1, 2, and 3 for the first page. 1. Wait a minute, I want to copy first. Wait. Okay, on the second page, please. 1, 2, 3. Smile. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. See you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank
we
you.
hope to collaborate with all of you soon again.
I think we can just stop here, and later on I can invite maybe whoever want to join to just rejoin again to this link, and then we can have just a recap and stuff, you know. Maho Nakayama, thank you so much, and Fumiko, Andi, Prof. Marla, thank you so much.
Andi-san, thank you so much, everyone, for inviting me.
Thank you, Doc Marla. Doc Yus, yeah, Yusi-san.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry.
Thank you, sir.
Ayan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, nandyan pa si Dan. Thank
So
you,
better we
Dan.
just stop first, and then we can just join in again, yeah. Then
we can go
stop,
back.
yeah.
Okay,
Join with the same link, yeah. Thank
for
you.
the
Thank you, thank you.
panelists. Okay.
Exactly. Panelists or whoever you want to join, basically. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma'am Nori.